evening. Welcome to tonight's On the Edge with me, Theo Chalmers. Tonight's show is once again an hour long and live, and it should have been 2 hours, but as you might have seen if you tuned in at 8, we had a bit of a delay. So if you have any questions for our guests during the show, text them to 87778 with the word EDGE, a space, and then your name, location, and your message. And we'll try to pick up on any that really hit the mark. They're all charged at standard rates, so why not get texting? In tonight's show, I'll be talking with a very special guest, an author, researcher, and lecturer in the field of alternative knowledge, whose life has been changed beyond recognition by a most extraordinary artifact, which was entrusted to his care and which might carry with it the proof of alien-human genetic hybrids. My guest is author of the book, The Starchild Skull, and he is the Starchild Skull's guardian and its research coordinator. He is Lloyd Pye. What a show we've got tonight. Lloyd, welcome.
Thank you, Theo. It's good to be here.
It's good to see you. So, as is obvious, I have on my desk two skulls. Can you tell me a little bit about them to start us off here?
Well, both of them are actually not real skulls. They're stereolithographic copies of real skulls, but they are as exact as science can make them in terms of copying the originals, so that they are the same weight, the same texture as we can get it, and it's certainly painted the same. So they weigh, the weight is the same, shape's the same, everything's the same of the real ones that were found.
Okay, and you have the real ones?
I don't have them, no, but the owners do. Ray and Melanie Young in El Paso, Texas are the owners, and they keep the originals locked away because they have the potential to be some of the most valuable things in the world.
Okay, and
the one does anyway.
Okay, and that's this one. This
right.
is the stereolithograph of the Starchild skull.
Right.
And this is not his jaw, is it, or her jaw?
No. If you show me, hand it over, I'll show your audience. The way it works is we got this piece right here, the upper maxilla. This is your upper jaw as it sweeps around here. So we recovered that. It was smaller than this. And so we asked a dental lab to build us a lower face that would sort of replicate that and give people a sense of how it would have looked if it had a lower face. And they said, quite simply, we make dentures, we don't make dentures for children. So we'll give you the smallest adult size we can create, which is what they did. So while this is bigger than it would have been in real life, it gives you a sense, it puts kind of a face on something that is, without it, is kind of, extra weird looking, and it gives people a sense that it's maybe some kind of a monster or some kind of an animal.
Well, talking of face, what I'm going to do now is I'm going to show the camera, this is the book, The Starchild Skull, your book, which if you can zoom into that, you will see this is an artist's impression of what the Starchild Skull the Starchild himself or herself might have looked like
in life, yes.
In life. Yeah. So, it's not horrific, is it? It's not a...
No, it's human-like. It's just very different in a number of key ways, but I don't think it would have made you gag to see it in real life, but you would have stepped back and said, this is very unusual.
Now, it was found you can talk about that in a minute, but it was found with another skeleton, wasn't it, at the time, which was a regular-looking human.
Exactly.
And this is not actually a reproduction of that. This is just here for to show the differences, if you like. So
it's the same size as the adult, but the adult that was found was cradle-boarded, which is, for its time common, but not today. So I bring that one, which is a normal skull, so people can compare the rears in a fair comparison.
Okay. Well, we'll talk about cradle boarding in a bit, but what I'd like to do, if I can, is just go back over the history of it. Who found the skull? Okay. Where was it found?
A woman from El Paso, Texas, who was of Mexican heritage. She was about 13, 14 years old in 1930. She couldn't remember in later life her exact age at the time. She went with her family back to her parents, their home village, which they hadn't been to since they immigrated. So that was quite some time.
She was Mexican then?
Mexican. So that was their first visit. It was her first visit back to the village. The village is about 100 miles southwest of Chihuahua. That's all we know. We don't know its specific place, its specific location, because when she was telling this, she had no idea that it would be important down the road. So
okay, we've got, this is a map of
this map
the
of
area.
Chihuahua. So it'd be about 100 miles southwest. It would be near the Copper Canyon area of Mexico.
So it's almost directly halfway between Cancun and Tijuana, isn't it?
Pretty much in the middle of nowhere, exactly. This is an isolated high desert region. If people have been to the Grand Canyon area of Arizona, very similar to that type of terrain. So when they got there, they told them, don't go in the caves or the mine tunnels around here because it's dangerous and it's taboo and we just don't do it. So being a teenager, you know, first opportunity she had, she snuck away to do what she had been told not to do.
We've got some pictures, haven't we, of that sort of general area and some of those mines, because it's near Copper Canyon, isn't it?
Right. Well, it's near the Copper Canyon area, exactly. This does not mean that they mined copper there necessarily. It could have been anything. It certainly went back in time 900 years, so they would have most likely been mining gold then or something like that, because it would have been the Aztecs or the Incas, and I don't think they would have been mining copper necessarily, possibly, but more likely gold or silver.
And this girl, what did she find?
Well, she found a mine tunnel and she went in, and as she walked into it, she saw, at some depth in, she saw a human skeleton lying on its back. And as she got closer, she noticed what she called a misshapen hand coming out of a mound of dirt beside that body. And that misshapen hand had been wrapped around the upper arm bone of the human that was laying there, making it fairly clear that whatever was in the hole had been buried, and then that person laid down, wrapped the arm around themselves, and killed themselves. Because that's, you know, it's clearly a burial and then a suicide of some kind. We don't know how she would have killed herself, but she could have and did. So what the girl did was she noticed that the dirt looked very like it had happened not too long ago, that had been there. And in a mine tunnel, you would have no compaction of the soil of a grave. So with her bare hands, she just dug it out, and she dug out what she called a misshapen skeleton, misshapen skull, misshapen body to go with the misshapen hand. So she tried to recover both skeletons. That was her intention, and she took them and she hid them in some roots under a tree near a gully to give herself some time to think about, how do I explain what I've done here when I've been told not to do this. That very night, horrific rains came for 2 days, washed the bones away. When she got there when she could, 3 days later, she found all the bones gone. She went searching downstream. She found the 2 skulls and the detached piece of maxilla, was happy to have that, and she was able to smuggle those back. Even though it wasn't illegal, there was no smuggling in 1930, but smuggling from her parents and the villagers who had told her not to do this.
How old was she?
About 13 or 14.
Okay. So it's quite a risky thing to do, wasn't it?
Going off on her own, very daring. I know. So
cave.
She kept them her whole life as souvenirs. She thought that this one was just a deformed human, as anybody would think normally, and that was it. So in the early 90s, she found that she was dying of a terminal disease, and so she gave them to some friends to look after. They kept them for 5 years, but they were a little uncomfortable with 2 skulls in a cardboard box in their garage. So they had another set of friends, Ray and Melanie Young, the other couple.
The couple that owned the skulls.
That own them. And they knew that Melanie was a neonatal nurse, and they felt that she would be okay with a deformed skull in a box, and it wouldn't be a problem. And Melanie said, yeah, sure, bring them over. I wouldn't have a problem with that. She'd seen every kind of deformity in her job. So when the skulls were brought to them and given to them, and she felt it first and looked at it, she knew immediately it wasn't a deformity because it was too symmetrical. Deformity, the hallmark of deformity is it's asymmetrical and it doesn't look right relative to normal humans. So she said, this is not a deformity as far as I can tell, and it's too light. It's way too light, she told her husband. And she said, and look at the crease in the back of the head. And she said, that's not a human thing either. But they both knew what it was because it just so happened by sheer coincidence that they were members of MUFON of El Paso. MUFON is the Mutual UFO Network. It's a network of...
Yeah, I've heard of MUFON.
Right. So, and they're big. They're a big organization. So they knew about what gray aliens would look like. So Melanie said, I think it's a gray, the skull of a gray. It's not a human skull. In my opinion, I think we need to have this thing tested. And so they began a search for somebody that knew a little about skulls within the alternative community, and that's how my name came up. and that's how I ended up with them. So they showed it to me and they said, would you see about getting it tested? And I said, sure, this is so unusual, this is so incredible. Take about maybe 6 months at most, and doctors will be specialists will be lining up to try to figure this thing out. And I'm talking to you 11 years later. So that shows you the kind of resistance that we met in this process.
Well, it's certainly changed your life, hasn't it? Because
inside out.
I know you go around the world on lecture tours, and you've employed experts of every kind to analyse the skull, and you've cut pieces from it. And so, do you want to talk to me about the tests that the skull has undergone?
Well, the first test we did was a series of X-rays, and that right away that showed us that it was unusual in that it has no frontal sinuses at all, no vestiges of the frontal sinuses, and that's very unusual. The X-rays also showed that the maxilla, the upper maxilla, had bones in the top of it. And at first they said, well, if you have bones down, if you have teeth down and teeth up in the bone, if I said bones a minute ago, I'm sorry, teeth up, teeth down, that's a child. They said it's got to be a child around 5 or 6 years old. They were just X-ray technicians. They weren't really specialists, dental specialists. So that's how it came to be called the star child. Later, we gave it to specialists, and they looked at the wear on the teeth and the roots, and they said that that's not a child's tooth.
We have got some images of the teeth, haven't we? I don't know whether we can show those now. Perhaps not.
It's okay. Or show them as you're able. But the bottom line was these were adult teeth in what looked like a child's palate. It's about an inch. The maxilla is about an inch long. The palate is flat, so it's like no tongue or a very small tongue in there, if a tongue at all. Very unusual and very small. So we know it has a very reduced lower face for a number of reasons. Not just the size of the maxilla, but we later found other tests that the chewing muscles are about half the size of normal human chewing muscles. And the X-rays also showed that the brain had pressed up against the bone of the skull, so there was no possibility of water on the brain.
So it couldn't be a hydrocephalus child.
Hydrocephaly, no, it's not hydrocephaly for a number of reasons. Hydrocephaly is water on the brain, so it causes uniform pressure, whether it's on the brain or in the brain, the pressure is uniform. And there's no way with uniform pressure that you're going to get the kind of crease that you see right here.
Because it would have been pushed out like a football.
Out. Exactly, it would have bowed it out uniformly as far as that goes. And we have actually a picture, one of the pictures that I brought of hydrocephalic, so you can see that the shape of them is uniformly round everywhere, and it isn't neat like this is. So clearly not a hydrocephalic, and we could tell that from the time of the X-rays.
Now, you mentioned cradle boarding. Now, cradle boarding was a sort of cult thing, wasn't it?
It's not really a cult thing. No, really it's not, Theo, because in primitive cultures, women have to work they have to go back to work shortly after childbirth. And so the baby has to be carried with them, and they carry them on their backs on a board, and they have to tie the head down, because as they stoop and do their work, the baby's head it's the heaviest part of their body almost at first, and their necks can't take the strain. So you tie their heads down, and because the bones of an infant are so soft, they take the shape of the board, so they come out, the rear of the head comes out as flat as that table. And if you see, the star child has natural convolutions, very clear, and you can feel them.
Yes, I have felt them,
and you can see them. So it was never cradle boarded. A cradle board would have flattened this for real. But also, too, a cradle board always stops. All human beings, all chimps, all gorillas, all everything, has a knot back here. We all, everybody listening, just feel your own.
Everybody in the studio earlier on felt today there is a little knot there.
Everybody has that, except for this being, which has a dent, an actual physical dent, a slight recession, instead of a bone there lumped out as it should be, as it is on the other one.
We've got an image here.
Right. And instead of the neck muscles attaching here beside it the way they should, the neck muscles here, you'll see, these are the fossa here, they attach right on top of the foramen magnum where the spine comes into the skull. So it has a neck about half the size of a normal human neck. Very, very different design.
So even if the child had some deformity of the head, That wouldn't have affected its neck, would it?
Wouldn't have affected its neck, wouldn't have taken out its inion, you know, with that knot back there is called the inion, wouldn't have taken that out, wouldn't have taken out its sinuses. If it's just a physiological deformity, you still need the human parts.
And it wouldn't have had such symmetry either, would it?
Wouldn't have been as symmetrical as this. And it wouldn't have shallowed the eye sockets. We haven't really talked about that, but as you can see, the eye sockets are very, very shallow.
And there's some really interesting things about this neck, aren't there? So if you can tell me about those.
Well, first of all, you have to look at what a neck is supposed to look like, and with a normal human, get it up here, the neck sits about a third away from the rear and 2/3 of the forward because it's empty. You have the sinuses, you have the deep eye sockets, you have the mouth and all. So it sits about like this. Now
So, sorry, were you saying then that the weight is evenly distributed?
I'm sorry, the weight is distributed, the bulk of the weight of it is distributed toward the rear with the cerebellum, and this pocket here holds it so that the spine, the way it sits, the weight of the brain is pushed toward the rear so that it's resting on bone.
Oh, here we go. We're getting on this monitor. We can see the balance.
Right. You can see the balance points there, so that makes it pretty clear. With the Star Child, what we get is a very different alignment because its brain is a lot bigger than it should be. This is 1,200 cubic centimeters of brain in the human. This should be 1,200 cubic centimeters. We, all of us, normal people, have 1,400 cubic centimeters. The Star Child has 1,600 cubic centimeters. It's carrying a lot more candle power in its head than we have.
Okay.
Now the question is, where does it all go and how does it coordinate? It's strange because the Star Child's foramen magnum sits directly under its head. I mean directly so that it's balanced front to rear and side to side. Imagine a lopsided golf ball on a golf tee. That's how this big head is sitting on this skinny little neck. It's a very strange design. But more than that, all this extra brain that's back here in the expanded parietals is pressing straight down. There's no curve here to absorb the pressure. It's straight down into the opening of the foramen magnum. So the brain specialists that have discussed it with me said, you know, look, the whole thing should be just squeezing out of the neck hole, but it's not for some reason. So what he says is that either it doesn't have a cerebellum of the kind that we have, or the brain, the matter of the brain, is much denser, thicker, somehow able to resist the push of its own weight out of that hole, because that's the weakest part. And if you have hydrocephaly, if you're really a hydrocephalic, the pressure is going to push your brain up here, but it's also going to push it out here, and this is what's going to kill you. The brain squeezing out between the spine, out the neck hole.
So although it's perfectly balanced on this tiny, thin neck, if it was a human type's brain, it wouldn't be practical. It wouldn't live.
No, it would have to, exactly.
And as you said from the teeth, it wasn't a child. So it had lived to some
considerable years.
age.
Right, exactly.
Okay.
It just doesn't make sense. It really doesn't make sense. If it's brain material like we have, it should have squeezed out of there.
Okay, let me read a text here. I don't know who this is from. It says, what exact forensic tests were done? And is the bone made up of human or unidentified matter?
The bone is made up of very unusual bone, if you want to call it that. It's actually made up of more like tooth enamel than bone. Human bone has a distinctive signature. We have slides of it if we can pull that up.
Let's see if we can find that slide.
This Star Child has a very distinctive chemical signature, which is again more like tooth enamel. So it's much harder than human bone. Much harder and much thinner. And much thinner. The bone is uniformly half as thin as it should be. It weighs half as much, and it's 2 to 3 times as hard. Right. Much harder.
This is the human bone composition here, and if we can show the Star Child's bone composition,
you'll see the carbon and oxygen jump way up, and that's more a signature of tooth enamel. Exactly. So it's pretty clear the difference is stark.
I'm wondering how it could have lived its life. I mean, it's got this heavy brain in a light skull.
Right.
And the heavy brain is
very durable.
Okay, and pushing straight down. But I mean, I can't imagine that this Star Child could have been, say, an athlete in any way, or be running around, because the brain would be on this thin neck would be.
Yeah, I wouldn't consider this an athlete. No, I wouldn't at all.
So it would be kind of very sedentary creature.
I don't know sedentary, but I wouldn't see it out playing football or anything like that. It could maybe run or do something like that, but I don't see it taking a lot of, body shots.
Okay, so let's talk a bit more about the tests that were done. So the first test that you did.
We did X-rays. We've done CAT scans. We've done carbon-14. We dated it at 900 years ago. Both skulls individually, different labs, different times, and both came back with the exact same result. So it's very likely that they did die together about 900 years ago.
Okay, here's an X-ray comparison we're just showing now.
Right. We did the scanning electron microscope, which gave us the one that we just saw about the biochemistry of the bone, and those are some of the forensic tests that have been done. We had a forensic DNA test done that didn't work out very well. They were contaminated and they just got a wrong read, which we found out later when we had a more sophisticated ancient DNA test done on it.
And what did the ancient DNA test
Well,
show us?
this is probably the most important part of the story. When we finally got the DNA tested in 2003, what they found was that the Star Child's mother was definitely human and was not the female, and by then we knew it was a female, found with it. So this was not the Star Child's mother. It was either a caretaker, a very close friend, a lover, whatever, but she was willing to bury it after it died and die with it. So there was obviously a very close relationship. We had assumed for a very long time it was the mother, but the DNA proved that it wasn't. But what the DNA also showed was that while its mother was human, its father was not entirely human. In 6 attempts to recover what was clearly recoverable DNA, had it been a human father, in 6 attempts there was no recovery. So there's something about the father's DNA that does not allow human-only primers to connect with it.
Okay, let me ask you a question here from the text. Samuel Montgomery from Ballyclare. Are there any other alien skull finds, and how do they compare to the Mexican skull?
The Star Child is the only one of its kind that I know, and I probably know as much about weird skulls out there now as anybody going. And what I know is that I've never seen anything like the Star Child. However, there are another group of skulls out there that I think have a good chance of being aliens. There's one in the rack that I brought, and they're called the Coneheads.
We've got some images of the Coneheads.
Right.
Let's see if we can find
Coneheads are found around the world, but they're dominantly found in Peru. They have hundreds of them in museums in Peru. But what makes the Coneheads unique, and what makes me think that they're not human as well, is that their brain capacity is twice ours. We average about 1,400 cubic centimeters of brain. The Coneheads average between 2,800 and 3,000 cubic centimeters of brain. So there's no way that deformity or reshaping of a human head can double the brain capacity. It just doesn't happen.
Here we go. These are the Coneheads.
Right.
They are extraordinary, aren't they?
They really are. And
but
they
has anyone
should be
tested
tested.
These?
No, as far as I know, nobody has. This is an answer that science doesn't really want to deal with. They don't want to deal with the Star Child, nor do they want to deal with this, because of it's going to upset the apple cart as thoroughly as the apple cart can be upset, and so they just don't want it to happen on their watch, and so they don't make any effort to do it. But I can tell you that if I get the opportunity, I will do it.
Okay, well, we look forward to hearing that. Here's another question. Does this tie in with Sitchin's Anunnaki theories?
Yeah, it does. Well, in the sense that the Anunnaki are a human-like people, but they supposedly, according to Sitchin, genetically engineered human beings. One of the people that dealt with the Anunnaki were called the Ijiji, and they were described physically looking a lot like Greys as their sort of servants or kind of servants. So it could be that this ties in, and that it could be that the Greys are the Ijiji, if indeed you go with what Sitchin says.
Okay. Here's another one. This is from Jane in Crewe. Theo, does your guest know if there have been any attempts to trace the rest of the bones?
There's been no attempts because, number one, we don't know the exact village place, but number two, 900 years ago, there'll be no remains. There'll be nothing like that we can find anywhere. But we'd have to know the name of the village first. But after 900 years, I don't think it's reasonable to assume there would be anything left.
Okay. Bob in Whitehead says, is the Star Child maybe a watcher from the Book of Enoch?
Well, when you start speculating like that, it could be any number of things. But what I like to do is just focus on the science of getting it proven to not be entirely human. And once we know that, and once we accept that, which the the new DNA test will allow us to do, then we can begin to debate about what it might be. But let's first get it in the bag that it's definitely not human.
Okay, I've got a text here from Linda. She says, I nursed a 16-year-old untreated hydrocephalic child. It spent its life lying down and the skull wasn't symmetrical. It was the size of a pillow.
Right. They can get the size of, I understand that at one point in Old England there was one that got the size of a wheelbarrow. They had to carry it around in a wheelbarrow. So, they can
That's
get very big.
Scary stuff.
Yeah, I don't really know how people can live with that, that kind of circumstance, how their brain doesn't just shut off, why it doesn't squeeze out and do what
because of the pressure of all that water.
Should have, but if the bones spread out and thin out that much, it boggles my mind. You saw there's the slide that shows the normal hydrocephalics die with their heads not much bigger than that, normally.
But then she said it wasn't symmetrical, and this is, as you say, unbelievably symmetrical, isn't it?
There's no question this doesn't have hydrocephaly because, again, not only is it symmetrical, but it has the dent, and you just wouldn't have that.
And it has other things that make it so very different, doesn't it? Like the fact that it has no sinuses.
No sinuses. And also, another thing that makes it incredibly different is the fact that the bone itself has woven through its matrix, woven through the actual matrix of the bone, or some fibers, distinctive fibers, maybe as many as 4 different distinctive types of fibers woven through, and so far as we can find out, there's no such thing in any other bone of any kind, any animal
at all.
Any animal, any fish, anything. No such thing. So
not even dinosaurs?
Not even dinosaurs. Nothing. Bone does not have fibers woven through the matrix to sort of strengthen. Now, these are very durable fibers.
It's like glass fiber then, isn't it, or something?
It's not. We haven't tested it to see what it is, and I doubt that it's fiberglass, but it is very durable. It's like netting pushed in there, put in there to give it strength. Exactly.
We've got some images here. This isn't the glass. This isn't the fiber.
The fibers. If you go a few down. Yeah, there you go. That's images of the fibers right there, and you see 2 of the different kinds: the thick kind and the thin kind. And then in subsequent slides, you can see other kinds as well. This right alone. This should just boggle the minds of scientists. You should have scientists jumping up and down wanting to know what this is, but there's just a thundering silence. Then they really don't want to know, and I don't blame them. Look, if I was in their chairs, I wouldn't want somebody like me coming on to wreck my life and turn my life inside out and upside down. But, somebody's got to do it, and it just turned out to be my job.
I did find some things when I was looking on the internet. There's a thing called brachycephaly as well, which is a sort of elongated.
It's just really a misshapen head, and it can be caused by a number of things, which including premature closure of the sutures, meaning that a head is supposed to grow at a regular rate as the sutures close, in a normal fashion, with the soft spot, this junction of 3 right here being the last part. But a child can be born, and there can be a premature suture back here or anywhere, and that doesn't allow the head to grow properly, so you will get skewing in one or more directions, and that's just brachycephaly. It's just a different shaped, unusual shaped head.
Okay, here's an interesting one from Dave in Crawley. He says, are you aware of big skulls found in Thailand in the 1950s? The place is known locally as Big Head Cave. You heard of those? No, I have not, and it would be a question of what the date of those things are, because you do have things known as Gigantopithecus that come out of the Miocene era, and if that was from that time of millions of years ago, if these are fossil heads, then that would not be unusual necessarily, although it would be big news, because as of right now, we don't have anything but Gigantopithecus jaws and teeth. So if they're modern, I've not heard of them, no. Okay, so let's speculate a bit. What do you think this is? What do you think the Star Child skull is?
I think it's going to prove to be definitively a human-alien hybrid. I don't see how it's any other way. We're looking at a skull with basic physiological differences, at least a couple of dozen, possibly more. Now, if you extrapolate that out into the whole body, which she said was misshapen, and each of those differences, here's the key, Theo, each of those differences requires a different set of genetic instructions to create it. So those differences in the genetic instructions are going to show up in the recovery of the genome, and that's the test that we want to do next. All that we really have left to do is the full genomic recovery of the star child's entire suite of DNA, its base pairs. There's about 3 billion of them. Now, we have a human, we have a chimp, we have a gorilla, and we will soon have a Neanderthal. So we're going to have all of those 4, and when we have the star child, we can lay it down, its whole genome down against those and compare the differences. And when we do that, we'll be looking for how much the difference is. Is it 3%? That's equal to a chimp. Is it 5%? That's equal to a gorilla. Is it 1 or 2%? That's probably what will be a Neanderthal. But if it's more than just a little...
the possibility of a full genome test.
Right.
Now, I know that when they tested for the DNA of the skull, in order to get a match, they have to use some kind of standards that they already know about.
Right.
That's right. So they've got like standard types for females,
right,
humans, which they've therefore found a female match.
Well, there's 2 types of DNA. There's mitochondrial DNA and there's nuclear DNA. In each of our cells, except our red blood cells, we have a nucleus and we have cytoplasm floating around it, and then we have a cell wall. In the nucleus is all of the genome, everything that comes from your mother and your father, the total package. Floating outside in the cytoplasm is what's called mitochondria, which are small little pieces. So inside the nucleus, you have 3 billion base pairs. In the mitochondria, you have about 16,000 each, 16,000. The mitochondria come down from the females. So when you recover that tells you what the mother of the person looked like. Male or female, they have mitochondria, and all you see is what her mother's genetic package looked like, her mitochondrial package. In the nucleus, the 3 billion base pairs, right, and it would be the next one after that.
Next one after this one, then, yeah. I think. That's the one?
No, that's the base pairs. Next one, if you can get to the next one, and you see how it works. The female contributes to the mitochondria alone, but she also contributes into the nucleus, and the male contributes into the nucleus. So the 3 billion are both parents.
All right, so let's just say then, if the father of this child was, I don't know, let's say an alien, let's say a grey, for instance.
A grey alien, let's say.
It doesn't matter what his DNA was like, because you can look at it. You can still, if you had the money to do that genome analysis,
right,
you'd look at all the base pairs and you go, this is the DNA.
Right.
Of this.
Well, this is where, what you'll look at and see where the differences are. Now, let's assume it's a gray, and let's further assume, which we do, that it wasn't a sexual union that produced the star child, because we don't think that's probably possible. So if it's a genetic engineering kind of deal, then you don't have to get 60-40 or 70-30. You can take it down as much as 90-10 or 95-5, where only 5 or 10% or 15% is human and the rest could be alien. But when you test the mitochondrial DNA, all you're going to see, if there's any part of it that's human, that's all you're going to see, is that it's a human mother. So that's where we are right now. We know we had a human mother, but we don't know the percentage that she contributed to the body. But if you look at the body and you see how much of human is missing, really, just nothing there, hardly, the general shape, but when you break it down into the parts, they're very, as we've seen, they're very different. The eye socket, just everything is so different that dominantly it looks to be something other than human. So I am of the opinion, and that's what we're trying to prove, that in the mating, in the mixing, it was done genetically, and so you have a dominant of the father's DNA, and I think that when we recover the whole genome, that's going to just jump out, and it'll be a very large difference.
Okay, well, this is pure speculation, but would the reason for this experiment, if you like, be that the Greys wanted to become more adapted to, say, our environment or our planet? Or could it just be because they wanted to amalgamate themselves in some way with humans?
Well, it could be that those are possibilities. It could be that they're creating a series of beings that are going to be taken somewhere else where there's some need for some part of our genetics to live on a different planet with maybe a different environment, a different gravity, a different whatever, and with the durability of that bone, you would have to assume that it's going to be a planet with really intense gravity relative to ours so that the skeleton can stand up to the pressure. So that's my guess. It's to create beings that are going to be living in another environment entirely than Earth's environment. Or maybe it came here from another environment entirely and got stranded here and died, and this person, whoever she was, and for whatever reason buried it. It's just a real mystery. It's just a real mystery.
But presumably it and the female human that was with it had been alive concurrently.
Concurrently, yes. We assume that, yes.
So it could be that they were companions.
If she didn't know it, it's unlikely that she would have buried it and then killed herself with it. We assume, just based on what the girl said she found, that there was a deep and intimate relationship between these two people.
Okay. I've got a few more texts about people saying you should look for the skeleton, but the problem is that you don't exactly know where the cave is.
If we knew where it was, we would have been there, the first year. We don't know where it was. The woman died not realizing that 8 years later anybody would care. So all we have from her testimony of the place is 100 miles southwest of Chihuahua. Now we're hoping that someday, if this gets famous enough and gets enough widespread attention, that some members of her family will remember, oh, that's Aunt Betty's skull, or Aunt, whatever, and they'll contact us. But that's really what we hope for right now, is that somebody from her family will know about the skull story and will recognize it as such and will contact me and maybe tell me where the village was.
Okay, well, this is incredibly exciting to think that you could actually have analysis of, say, a grey alien's DNA, if indeed such creatures exist. So how much would it cost?
Well, unfortunately, or fortunately, however you want to look at it, 2 years ago it would have cost several $1 million. That's what it's cost to do the Neanderthal. But right now, today, we could start the test for $200,000. So it's much, much cheaper. And it would, instead of taking 2.5 years, it would take 3 to 4 months. So we could have an answer by the end of this year if somebody with really deep pockets stepped forward and said, here, we'll pay for it.
But it's a lot of money still, though, isn't it?
Well, in this economy, it is. But there's still a lot of people who lose $200,000 on a bad weekend in Las Vegas. So it's out there.
So you really, I know you're doing lecture tours. You're selling this book, The Star Child's Skull. But presumably that's not enough to stump up 200.
No, it's going to have to be somebody that wants to be a part of history, number one, and is willing to put the money up, because not only do we need to do the test, we need to do a documentary film built around the testing process and the history of the skull and all that. So you have to fund not only the testing but the documentary as well. So we've approached some television networks and channels about it, and we're still hoping that something will come through there. But the economy, let's face it, the economy is hurting everybody, including them, and it makes it difficult for them to make that decision.
Do you think there are those who might not want you to do this test?
Oh, I'm sure. If you were to ask just about any scientist out there, I'm sure they'd say, well, I'd rather he didn't. This is going to upset the apple cart, as I said earlier, in a very serious way. If this thing comes in as not entirely human, as we strongly suspect that it will, that changes everything. That's history about as big as history can be made.
Well, are you aware of any, efforts to stop you?
No, surprisingly enough, so far, knock wood, no. So far, I've been allowed to proceed as best I can. So I don't know why or how. I think I took some very good steps very early into this when I announced very wide. A lot of times when people get things like this, they try to keep them private and make money out of them, and that's how they lose them. So I was cautioned about that. So I just, from the very beginning, I let people know everything that I knew about it every step of the way. And if anything were to happen to it or to me now, it would everybody would know who
There
did
are
it.
samples in other places as well.
Oh yeah, samples in other places. So we've taken some precautions.
And one of the things you're doing, as I said, you're doing a lot of lecture tours. You're in London on Saturday, 20th of June at the University of London Unit in Mallet Street.
Right.
You're in Nottingham on Thursday, the 25th of June.
Right.
And you're in Leeds on the Saturday, the 27th of June.
Right. It's going to be a busy week, but yeah, three. Well, I'm from here. I'm going to Rome, and then to Javia, Spain, and then to Warsaw, Poland, and then I'll come back here. And I just came from Bucharest, Romania, so it's going to be a busy 6 weeks for me. For sure.
There's a lot of interest all over the world, isn't there?
Oh yeah, absolutely. This is probably I would imagine the most famous artifact in the field of alternative knowledge of this kind is the Mitchell-Hedges crystal skull, and I would imagine this is the most famous relic.
And here's your website on screen now, so people can go there and visit it and find out presumably where they can buy tickets for your lectures. Right.
If you go to the website, you will be able to find out, guide your way through and find out where the tickets are available for the lectures.
Okay.
All three of them.
Here's a bit of a left field question from Paul in Warrington. Would something like Project Serpo have relevance here, and time travel?
Well, Project Serpo is still very iffy. We don't know that that's for sure. Time travel is always an issue for everything, sure, because time travel, if this was a time traveler from somewhere else, deep into the future, people have suggested that, and come back and got trapped for some reason, always possible. But I don't again try to guess any of that. I'm going to just stick with trying to prove what I've got to prove, and let everybody else jump on the bandwagon of trying to figure out the story once we have it established what it is. Okay,
here's a question from Jackie in Brighton. Would that child have been hard for the mother to give birth to?
I don't really know at that point. I really don't know, because we don't know what the size of its head was when it was an infant, and we assume from the fact that it has sutures and perfectly growing sutures. If you see the CAT scan, it had perfectly growing sutures. So if you assume it's normal, then that head probably could have gone out the birth canal, because all of the sutures are open and it can take virtually any shape to get out. So I would think no more difficult than an average kid. We might mention too that the CAT scan also revealed that its inner ears are twice the size of our inner ears, and we figure that might be because of the need to balance that big head on that little neck might have added some need for, if indeed its inner ear is a balance mechanism the way ours is.
Okay. Denise in North Cambridgeshire, does Lloyd think the threads could be a wiring system built into the skull?
We don't think so. It looks to be organic. We've taken it to some mycologists to really, study and analyze it as best they could to see if it was bacteria or fungi or mold or anything like that. And they all agree that it's pretty much organic, an organic part of the bone. You can see it woven into the matrix. We have a shot where it shows clearly a fiber through the matrix right on the surface of the bone. So I think that's unlikely. I really do.
This is a really interesting question from somebody called Hesse. Has anyone taken Star Skull to Star Skull has got a new name now as well, to a reputable psychic to see if a contact can be made or an impression gained?
Actually, when I started out, I took it to about 50. There were about 50 people in the States who were recommended to me, and in every case, I got some of the most fantastic, creative, I'm a writer, and I know creative when I see it and hear it, and it was just, I would be enthralled. I'd be like, wow, that's incredible, but I kept hearing different stories every time. So I could have heard the exact truth, but there's no way to pick it out of all the other things that I heard. So after about 50, I realized it was pointless. It didn't matter if somebody came and told me the exact right thing, I would never know it. So I gave up. But yes, I gave it to at least that many. And in fact, one time we had a gathering of psychics in St. Louis. We had about 15 in one place, and they all accepted the challenge, and we took them all separately into the room, filmed them all, and they were so excited. And when it was all over, I kept saying, I think it's all going to be the same, different stories. Nobody's going to say the same thing twice. And they said, no, these are great psychics. These are the best in 3 states, and and they all said something different. So it was pretty well proved that it's unfortunately a waste of time. Unfortunately.
What a shame. Yeah. So,
we've tried everything.
We've got 1 minute left. What would you like to say in the last minute? Well, what's your main
Well,
theme,
I hope that those who are listening will make an attempt to come see one of the 3 lectures if they can, again in London, in Nottingham, and in Leeds. Get a copy of the book if you can't do that. The book's available on Amazon, very easy to pick up on Amazon, cheap, not a problem. And just inform yourself. The main thing is people need to be informed that history is in the making here, and we're going to win this one. It could actually change the world, couldn't it? I mean, I could see those headlines. Whenever I sign the book, I put history in the making because I believe that's what it is. I really do. Okay, so University of London Union, Mallet Street, Saturday 20th of June, Nottingham, Thursday 25th of June, Leeds 27th of June, that's a Saturday. It's been absolutely fascinating. Well, thank you for having me. It's been a real pleasure to come. I've been looking forward to it since Belinda told me we were going to work it out, and here we are. I mean, even though this is a stereolithograph of the actual skull, it certainly makes me feel very strange holding it and being, part of that. It's as close to the real one as you can get. Yeah, fantastic. Okay, that's all we've got time for. Thank you to everyone for watching the show. And for those who texted, and thanks to my very special guest, Lloyd Pye, and his Star Child skull. If you've enjoyed this show, please tell all your friends. Next week, we'll be back with yet another exciting show that might even change your life. Until then, remember, they're watching you, watching us, watching them. Cheerio.